Hello and welcome to a holistic approach to enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in counselor education. This session will explore the process of creating and implementing a holistic, outcome-based diversity, equity, and inclusion plan at a CACREP accredited counselor education program. The learning objectives include systematically identifying and addressing the unique needs of diverse segments of counselors in training and developing interventions to support them. Implementing strategies to assess and enhance the students' perceptions of inclusion in their classrooms and internship sites. Providing counselors in training with diverse and inclusive learning environments that encourage them to grow and develop into culturally competent professionals. And cultivating cultural competence in the faculty and enhancing the diversity and sense of inclusion among them. The session will start off with an overview and some background information about diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education in general. Then we'll look specifically at university level initiatives and then counseling program initiatives. And those counseling program initiatives will look specifically at what types of diversity, equity, and inclusion work is being done with our counselors in training, as well as with the counseling faculty. And then I'll open the session up for questions. Diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. Many universities have an established department for diversity on their campus. However, these offices are often understaffed or they're marginalized within the institutional infrastructure. Diversity departments often struggle to reach all levels of the organization, or those offices are used to deflect collective responsibility for diversity, equity, and inclusion on the college campus. This puts those institutions at risk for focusing exclusively on intercultural exchange and inclusion, but failing to restructure the major processes, values, and norms of the institution that could otherwise provide a supportive college experience for diverse students. When we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion in counselor education, what we know is that CACREP challenges all counseling programs to move beyond aspirational statements pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They hold us accountable as counselor educators to implement plans to actually to improve the diversity, equity, and inclusion in our programs. The ACA and CACREP expect counselors in training to have learning experiences that respect and reflect the diversity that exists in our society, and for those students to be prepared to effectively serve diverse clients. The diversity, equity, and inclusion work that is being done in the counseling program at NLU is a work in progress. We will continue to refine and develop the way we use data to better understand and respond to the needs of counselors in training and the faculty. When looking at NLU and the initiatives we've taken as a university when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, that work started to really take action or move into development through the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council that was established in 2018. The primary goal initially was to establish the goals for the DEI Council and then to build cohesion among the council members so they can have transparent and authentic conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion so they can develop real and effective solutions. This also included work with a consultant to understand the scope and priorities of the DEI work of the institution. And NLU was one of the inaugural members of the Illinois Equity and Attainment Initiative, which focuses on establishing best practices to eliminate racial and socioeconomic achievement gaps. This consortium has over 29 universities across Illinois as members. When we look at the university as a whole, we began to look at the demographics across the student body, the staff, the executive team, CEO, and the board of directors. And the board of directors is the highest level of leadership in the institution. When you look at the student body, you'll notice that it is predominantly comprised of students of color. And when we start to look at the staff and the executive team, we start to see that there's an underrepresentation of various groups of color within the staff and executive team of the institution. And when we get to the board of directors, there's an underrepresentation of people of color when you compare that to the student body being primarily comprised of students of color. As a university, we decided that a strategic plan needed to clearly and explicitly explain how we would go about developing the institution along the lines of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so the strategic plan spans from 2020 to 2030, and it includes components such as looking at the management and leadership demographics. As discussed earlier in this presentation, there's an underrepresentation of people of color in the leadership and executive leadership, as well as the staff of the institution. So really paying attention to that, looking at the faculty demographics and making sure that that reflects the diversity in our society and the diversity in our student body. Also looking at the staff demographics and looking at equity in student outcomes in order to note and ensure that there weren't, that students that fit within all of the demographic segments are able to navigate the program and achieve their learning outcomes. And finally, you have the student and employee diversity, equity, and inclusion scores. And these surveys are administered to the students as well as the employees in order to keep our finger on the pulse of how included and diverse people perceive the university climate to be. When we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion and the counseling program, what we're looking at is how that looks with the counselors in training, as well as the faculty and adjuncts. When we look at counselors in training, we're paying attention to and looking at the data pertaining to the demographics of the student body, the program learning outcomes, how we're looking at course and instructor evaluations, as well as evaluating the internship supervisors. And then we're examining the persistence and graduation rates, as well as employment outcomes. So those are kind of the major data points we're using. So as we look at diversity in the student body, what we want to note is that many undergraduate students at NLU identify themselves as people of color, and many of them are first-generation college students who come from families with low socioeconomic status. The intersections of each of those identities has created unique barriers to the students who enter the undergraduate education at our university, as well as their progress towards entering graduate school. And as an institution and as a program, the faculty and staff at NLU are mindful of those challenges, and we're looking to address them and utilize the support necessary to assist those students. According to researchers, negative beliefs may be expressed about students of color when faculty or peers suggest that those students have not earned their admission, or that they may erode the educational quality or reputation of an institution, or it is assumed that those students are admitted solely on the basis of the underrepresentation of their race. So these are kind of some attitudes and beliefs pertaining to having diverse students in a learning environment that we want to be mindful of as we look at, students of color in higher education. According to Bowen's research, students who interacted with diverse peers demonstrated increased levels of cognitive growth, and students who sustained cross-racial interactions in the context of their friendships and friend groups, those students demonstrated the greatest significant cognitive benefits and openness to diversity. So this is just highlighting how students really benefit from having diversity in the student body and why this is really important. When we look at the demographics of the counseling program, you'll see that consistently at least 50% of our student body is comprised of people who identify themselves as people of color. When we look at the key assessments and the program learning outcomes, we're really starting to now look at if there are any unique needs of various demographic segments of the student body. So when we kind of look at how our program learning outcomes are structured, they are aligned with the CACREP standards, and there are specific courses throughout the program that are embedded with those particular key assessments that determine if the students have achieved their learning outcomes. And we've just aggregated that data to look at the various segments of the student population. So the learning outcomes are, again, aligned with the CACREP standards, and they include looking at how students utilize and apply the code of ethics and legal standards. These program learning outcomes include multicultural competencies, applying theories of individual and family development across the lifespan, applying theories and models of career development, looking at major counseling skills and approaches, and utilizing assessments for diagnostic and intervention planning. Additionally, the program learning outcomes include looking at major counseling theories, group leadership, looking at personal characteristics and behaviors that influence the counseling process, as well as understanding the importance of evidence-based, ethical, and culturally relevant research in advancing the profession. So those program learning outcomes, again, are aligned with the CACREP standards. When we look at the courses that have key assessments in them, as you can see, the course at the very bottom of the list, the HSC 582 Counseling Internship course, is the final course in the program. That second internship, we're on a quarter system. That is a spring term course at the end of the program, and that is a summative assessment. The other assessments are formative, as we're collecting data on the students' achievement of their program learning outcomes from their first term in the program all the way through their third and final year in the program. The target metric that we're using to determine success is that 80% of the students, we want them to score at least 80% on the key assessments. So we're looking for 80% of the students to score at least 80% on the key assessments. The data is disaggregated based on the campus, and we have the Chicago, Elgin, Lisle, North Shore, and Wheeling campuses. It's also based on race and ethnicity. And we also look at the track that the students are on. So in this case, our race and ethnicity categories as an institution include 2 or more races: Asian, Black, Hispanic, undeclared, and white. And the tracks that are available to the students include the clinical mental health counseling track and the school counseling track. When we looked at our outcomes on an aggregate level, for the most part, the summative and formative assessments indicated that at least 80% of the students scored 80% or higher on their key assessments. So in that sense, there weren't any, the students all collectively achieved the learning outcomes. But when we began to disaggregate the data, that's when we started to notice that there were performance gaps between segments of students. In the formative assessments, what we noticed that in the school counseling track, that the Black and white students did not achieve the target metrics. And on the clinical mental health track, the Black and Hispanic students did not achieve all of their target metrics. And as you can see from these numbers below, some of the target metric, there were some numbers that fell short by 20%, like in the case where you had 60% of the students scored 80% or higher on PLO1, and 75% of some of the other students scored 80% or higher on PLO6. So again, these are areas where we noticed that there were achievement gaps at the formative assessment level. And again, the formative assessments are administered from year 1 all the way through to the year 3. The summative assessment, again, is administered in the final course of the program, which is Internship 2. And on the summative assessments, what we found is there was also a performance gap with our Black and Hispanic students in the school counseling track. So as we look at these program learning outcomes, we historically had been looking at the program learning outcomes annually. At the end of each academic year, we would pull all of that data and do our analysis. But we realized that in order to be responsive to some of those performance gaps, that we needed to collect that data sooner and collect and analyze that data more regularly. So we now do that on a quarterly basis. And this is really important for us to do it in this way because it is possible for students to pass a course, but not pass the key assessment. So for instance, a student may earn A's or really high marks on all of the other assignments in the course, but on that one key assessment item that is embedded in the course, they may earn less than a B on it. And if that person earns a C grade on that, which is not a passing grade, they could potentially still get by in the class with a low B. So we wanted to make sure that those students did not slip through the cracks, because students who don't earn a passing grade, which is a B, on any of their courses are automatically, those are automatically issues that are addressed because they need to retake the course. But for those students who actually pass the course, they could potentially slide under the radar without really having their learning needs addressed. So with this quarterly review, it gave us an opportunity to look at patterns in performance in individual students as well as segments of students. And the students who did not meet the performance metrics were identified, and their instructors were contacted in order to learn more about what was going on with those students during that term and with that particular assessment. And they provided that information to the co-chairs of the program and the campus coordinators, so we can kind of really better understand what those needs are of the students. The issues that came up when we documented the instructors' feedback about what was going on with the students who did not pass their key assessments, the issues that were impacting their performance fell into these categories: physical and mental health issues, as some students actually had some type of medical problem or issue, or they had some type of mental health crisis or issue. Some of our students have financial stability issues where they really were not sure if they could pay their bills and take care of themselves. So that was a major concern for them, such as getting utilities cut off or not being able to cover their rent. Also, some students had issues with their workload as they needed to maintain, put in a lot of hours on their job in order to take care of themselves and their family. And that amount of work interfered with their ability to dedicate an adequate amount of time towards their studies. Some of these students reported having a family crisis, and where they had to actually attend to and care for family members, and that took away from their ability to focus on their assignments. Some students had written communication challenges where their writing maybe somehow substantially interfered with their ability to convey their ideas about the material and impacted their grades. Other students had research challenges where maybe they really struggled with really compiling and synthesizing information and research in particular to write clear and robust papers. Some students reported that they just were confused by the instructions and they misunderstood them. And so there were pieces just missing from their paper or not done properly. And finally, some students had issues with their study plan in general. They really were not, they had not developed a consistent study schedule. They maybe were not aware of how they best consume and retain information. And so they really just were not taking a systematic approach to their studies. So in looking at the program outcomes and looking at some of the issues that were impacting the students that impacted their performance on their program learning outcomes, we developed individual level interventions as well as course level interventions that were administered or followed through with the classroom of students, or we have a cohort system, so the whole cohort would kind of get this support. On an individual level, future instructors were encouraged to reach out to those specific students and establish rapport with them in order to encourage them to identify resources to assist them with their personal challenges, because we found that some of those students maybe were not communicating their needs to their previous instructors, and their previous instructor may have been able to assist them or support them, but they hadn't because they didn't really realize those were problems until way it was too late. And also developing strategies to help the students utilize services at the institution as well as in the program. Some students that had more severe or substantial issues received success or remediation plans in order to really guide their process for addressing some chronic or ongoing issues. At the course level, instructors who were teaching the courses with those key assessments in them were instructed to be more mindful of scaffolding the learning material over the duration of the term so that the students can connect the dots and really understand how each component of the material they were learning tied into their overall knowledge as they developed their knowledge as they became professional counselors, as well as their understanding of how that fit into their assignments. Additionally, those instructors reviewed the key assessment assignments on multiple occasions to explicitly help students understand what was expected of them in those assignments and provided them with more opportunities to ask questions about things that they were confused about. And the instructors encouraged the students to utilize the writing center so they could get assistance with how they communicate their ideas, how they organize their papers, as well as APA format and research. So now as we look at instructional practices and diversity, equity, and inclusion, what we know historically is that higher education has fortified monoculturalism in our society as it regularly struggled to equitably integrate the contributions of diverse populations into all knowledge transmitting facets of the university. Aside from specific disciplines dedicated to studying multicultural issues, a lot of the specific disciplines have core knowledge that only tangentially integrates the distinct perspectives and experiences of diverse populations. So that is the bigger picture issue that many institutions face, and so that's an ongoing issue in higher ed. Also, students of color have reported that when they highlighted the discrepancies or absences of certain material from the curriculum, that they were discouraged from making it a race issue. Students explained that they often felt pressured to identify the commonalities they shared with others in spite of their racial and ethnic differences. This is actually contrary to what we should be doing professionally, and specifically to the tripartite development model. And this framework encourages us as counselors to look at all levels of our client's identity as well as our student's identity. And as counseling professionals, that individual level of identity, or that very specific and unique experience that each person has in their life, is automatically addressed in the counseling relationship because we're talking about their unique experience. Also, that the universal level dynamics that every human being experiences is kind of built into our work and our experiences in society. Like as human beings, we all, breathe, we consume food. And so these are kind of universal kind of dynamics that we are mindful of. The group level of identity gets a little tricky because now we're talking about specific populations or groups of people that have something in common with each other that's distinct from other groups. And that tends to be something that the students, again, are reporting that they sometimes are discouraged from looking at that. They're more encouraged to look at, hey, what does everyone have in common? What are these universal human principles and dynamics? And they're looking specifically at the nuances of their unique client, but that group level is sometimes overlooked. Students of color often reported that they silently struggled with the cognitive dissonance associated with not sharing their perspectives for the sake of minimizing conflict, while other students carried the burden of becoming the proverbial eye of the storm by challenging their professors. Faculty, as the intellectual leadership of the university and the professions that they represent, are responsible for cultivating and developing students' ability to be open to diversity and challenge. Ryder and others determined that learning environments that valued a broad spectrum of ideas and perspectives were positively associated with the students being open to diversity and challenge. Also, faculty's advocacy for the respect of diverse ideas and perspectives was positively associated with the students being open to diversity and challenge. The integration of multiculturalism throughout the curriculum is a part of what is expected of all counseling programs. And so multiculturalism and multicultural issues are not supposed to be just confined to a multicultural course. So in reflecting on instructional practices and looking at what the instructors do specifically at our university, we determined that we wanted to make sure that we use the instructor and course evaluations as an opportunity to give our instructors, for our instructors to give feedback on how well they are able to kind of cultivate diversity and inclusion in their learning environment. So the course evaluations are administered on a quarterly basis and annually. The aggregate of that data is reviewed. We added some diversity, equity, and inclusion questions to our idea survey, which is the instructor / course level evaluation that's administered every term for every course that is offered. So every instructor, for every course they teach, the students complete this idea survey. And the diversity, equity, and inclusion questions that were added to the survey included, did the instructor encourage students to reflect on how their own cultural identities and biases could influence the way they applied the course content to their work in the field? Did the instructor introduce the students to culturally specific and culturally informed theories and approaches to the subject matter? And did the instructors provide students with the learning materials such as demonstration videos, books, etc., that included the expertise of culturally diverse counselors. So those were the three diversity, equity, and inclusion questions that we integrated into our instructor/course evaluations. And those students rated their instructors on a scale of 1 to 5. And the goal is for every instructor to achieve at least a 4 on each of those questions. And as you can see, when we administer this to the students over this cycle, overall, the average was above 4. So we felt like we're on the right track in this area, but we still want to be mindful of when we don't hit those targets and being mindful of improving our instructional practices in general. So when we looked at this data as an aggregate, again, overall, we scored at least a 4 on each of those questions. But when we disaggregated that data based on instructors, when we noticed an instructor fell below the standard, we developed performance improvement plans for them to assist them and help them develop and gain access to resources to improve their instructional practices. So the improvement plans included some of the following items: integrating culturally specific theories into their courses, because some of those may not necessarily be inherently present in some of the textbooks they're using. So they were encouraged to do some additional research to supplement their courses with that material. Instructors were also encouraged to integrate demonstration videos with diverse experts. And this is really important because that is distinct from showing diverse people as clients and the recipients of services. We want to normalize and acknowledge that counseling professionals are diverse and have knowledge and skills to offer. Adding case examples with diverse clients was utilized, and adding reflections and classroom discussions on how cultural bias can impact the students' work with diverse clients. And also some of those plans included utilizing the university's mediators and safe space allies to address the challenges that might emerge in the classroom environments, because we found that sometimes instructors feel intimidated by having some of certain types of conversations with the students because they fear that maybe there will be conflict among the students. And so those resources are there just in case they have any issues with facilitating those conversations. When we look at clinical supervision and diversity, equity, and inclusion, we know that there's a need for clinical supervisors to help supervisees develop their multicultural knowledge and skills in the way they conceptualize and develop interventions for clients, as well as their advocacy with and on behalf of clients. We know that broaching cultural factors in clinical supervision has been demonstrated to strengthen the supervisory relationship and enhance client care. It has also been linked with reducing role conflict and ambiguity. So again, this broaching is not only something that is important in the counselor-client relationship, it is important in the supervisor-supervisee relationship as well. Supervisees have reported that they needed to be supported, have their experiences validated, and they needed to process their interactions at the supervisory level. So again, these supervisees are saying the support is critical, being validated is critical, and processing their interaction. So again, something that we might do, that we do with clients, is something that as supervisees that we should be doing with our supervisees. And communicating and processing experiences at the supervisee-supervisor level is important for creating a safe space for supervisees. And we know that that safety is critical to the supervision being effective. So this is something to keep in mind. So with our program, we are very clear in understanding that our site supervisors are an extension of us. They are an extension of the learning environment. And so we want to be mindful and accountable for tracking how our students are perceiving and experiencing their supervisors in the field. And the site supervisors are evaluated at the end of the program during that final internship course. And what we did is we added diversity, equity, and inclusion questions into the site supervisor evaluation. And we started collecting the students' demographic information so we can, in a sense, also determine if there are any differences in how different segments of the student population experience their supervision. The questions we added to the site supervisor evaluation included: my internship site supervisor encouraged me to reflect on how my own cultural identity and bias could influence my work with clients. My internship site supervisor provided me with opportunities to work with diverse clients whose cultural backgrounds were different from my own. My supervisor helped me utilize advocacy and multicultural competencies to address the institutional and systemic issues impacting culturally diverse clients. And my supervisor was responsive to my ideas and feedback about how cultural dynamics influenced our supervisory relationship and my experiences at the internship site. So again, those questions were added to the site supervisor evaluation because they had not previously been asked. And these site supervisors were evaluated on a scale of 1 to 5, with the goal being to earn at least a 4 on each of those questions. And as we looked at the data, what we found is that across the board, as an aggregate, our site supervisors earned over a 4 on those questions, and they did so with students from all demographics. So again, even though our internship site supervisors performed pretty well on the DEI questions that were added to their evaluations, we still wanted to make sure that we are developing their skills and their competencies in that area. And so what we started doing is during our internship site supervisor orientation, we started dedicating a portion of that training to discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the counseling program, as well as how we're evaluating it. We also started offering DEI continuing education through 2 webinars per academic year. And we also started more intentionally inviting our site supervisors to cultural awareness trainings, as well as educational events that are sponsored at the university level. And because we understand that our site supervisors are really busy and may not be able to attend some of those workshops and trainings, we started requesting that those trainings be recorded so our internship site supervisors could watch them later. So now we're going to shift gears and look at how persistence, graduation, and graduation rates and DEI operate in higher education. And again, a risk factor in the retention of students of color was the presence of white dominance or the standardization of white cultural experiences, which often perpetuated the expression of white privilege in the student body and among the faculty. So again, students of color were less likely to graduate and be retained in their programs or in their university if there was the presence of white dominance. At predominantly white institutions, students of color, in comparison to their white peers, reported lower ratings of campus racial climate. So again, paying attention to how various demographic segments experience the college environment so that those nuanced experiences don't get lost in the aggregate, which could easily happen, especially in predominantly white institutions. Students of color who reported a greater sense of cultural fit and who had a stronger racial identity were more engaged academically and socially on campus. Culturally inclusive and validating social climates are positively associated with higher graduation rates of students of color. So again, really paying attention to the climate of the institution has an impact on the level of engagement as well as the graduation rates of students of color. When we looked at the program, the counseling program at our institution, what we noted is that the persistence rate was over 90%, which is pretty good. However, we did notice that there was some fluctuation in that in various demographic segments of students. And so again, this is something that just kind of helped us pay attention to if there are any types of trends that might indicate that our students are not persisting. And for the graduation rates, you'll see that there were some, the program is a 3-year program. And so students who started in 2017 were expected to graduate in 2020. And as you can see, the demographic segments of students that had the lowest graduation rates were the Black and Hispanic students in the program. And so that is, again, something that we're now, kind of really just being mindful of, and what are the factors that are impacting that for our students. And when we're looking at persistence and graduation rates, what we are really mindful of is that persistence inevitably impacts graduation rates. And this is because a student that does not persist from one term to the next because maybe they fail a class or they withdraw from their courses in a particular term, this automatically extends the amount of time it takes them to complete the program. And in some cases, those students don't ever return, which means they don't complete the program at all. In our program, withdrawing from or not passing a course also means that the students shift cohorts. So the cohort has to take all of their classes at the same time. And so if someone does not complete a particular course, they then get put into the cohort, the cohort behind their cohort in order to persist with that new group of students. When we looked at what were some of the reasons for students withdrawing from the program or from their courses, what we found is there were some similarities in many of the issues that were impacting them. Many of the students reported that there were issues with their work schedule, or they just could not fit in their courses because there was a change in their availability. Their workload impacted their ability to finish the program or stay enrolled in courses because they were overburdened with work responsibilities or the number of work hours that really impacted their ability to study. Some students had transportation issues, or where they literally just had issues with physically getting to campus, because our program is blended, but it's blended face-to-face, which means most of their work is done in person, but they do have some online discussion component to their studies. So every week they are expected to be on campus. And so some students had issues with transportation, or they relocated, so the campus was no longer really feasible for them to continue to attend. Other students reported family responsibility issues, and often this was associated with taking care of their own children or taking care of their parents. And physical and mental health issues were also issues that were reported as contributing to the students withdrawing from the program. When we look at career development, employment, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, what the research indicates is that students of color may enter higher education with lower levels of social capital. Therefore, it is important for them to maximize their time-limited access to the faculty, staff, and peer relationships they have within the institution to cultivate that social capital. Additionally, most institutions of higher learning agree that social capital is positively associated with and it positively influences students' college experience. It increases the likelihood that they will complete college, and social capital launches students or graduates into successful careers. So again, that social capital is really critical for students navigating their institution successfully, finishing their degree, and entering their profession. When we looked at employment rates with our student body, what we noticed is, again, there was some fluctuation from year to year. And what we found most importantly is that asking our students if they were employed at graduation was too general of a question. And because it really did not address our unique concerns and information needs pertaining to our students. This included us understanding the type of employment those students had. Were they actually employed as professional counselors, or were they employed in some other industry that was unrelated to their degree? We were also concerned about the level of employment because a student could be part-time or full-time, and we wanted to know, well, were they full-time or part-time? Also looking at if the student achieved their actual employment goals. For instance, if a student is planning to start a family, they may earn their degree not intending to work full time when they graduate. And so that is something we would need to pay attention to, because that student's goal was not to get employed full time. And so they did achieve their employment goals by maybe working part time or maybe not working right away at all when they graduate. And also, we want more information about what facilitated their employment and what were some barriers to their employment. So those were kind of some gaps in information that we really want and that we are working to develop in this upcoming cycle. Then when we're looking at the timing of the collection of data, we really understand that on one hand, we want to maximize the number of responses we get, but on the other hand, we want to be collecting information that is most relevant. And so in maximizing the responses, we may collect the data well before the students graduate in their last term in the program. However, some of our students may not start actively seeking employment until after they graduate. And so we may, in a sense, get, a false read on where students are with their employment because they're actually not even looking for a job right away. Additionally, we started really thinking about what are some other potential sources of information for, that we can use to learn more about our graduates and their employment status. And one of the sources that came up was using LinkedIn and using our alumni association in order to kind of use tools like LinkedIn to kind of capture and gather data on our students' employment. So now we've looked at diversity, equity, and inclusion specifically with our students. We also looked at diversity, equity, and inclusion as it pertains to our faculty. And some of the ways we looked at DEI included looking at the demographics of our faculty, the retention rates, the courses taught by the diverse instructors, and our mentorship process. So when looking at faculty in higher education as a whole, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, what we know is that diverse faculty provide opportunities to enrich the curriculum with a variety of perspectives and knowledge. Diversifying the faculty creates a more inclusive environment, and lack of faculty diversity on college campuses denies all students of the opportunity to expand dominant cultural bound values and perceptions by learning from and about various histories. Minoritized students often look to diverse faculty to model and socialize them to develop strategies for navigating and succeeding in white environments. So again, the presence of diverse faculty serves all students and is specifically relevant for minoritized students. And diverse students benefit from the formal and informal interactions they have with diverse faculty. So in kind of looking at faculty and student demographics according to CACREP, what we know is that there is an underrepresentation of faculty of color in, across the board when it comes to the students that are enrolled in the master's and doctoral programs and the faculty who teach in those programs. There isn't that representation. We're not there yet. And when we're looking at NOU, what we know is that, people of color made up 50% of the students in the counseling program at NOU. And 45% of our faculty identified themselves as people of color. So our movement and kind of growth in that area, because before we were at 30% and now we're at 45% consistently, that for us is showing that our faculty is really trying to reflect the diversity in our student body. However, as we look more deeply into the data, what we really realize is that most of the faculty of color teach on, on one campus. And there are 2 campuses that don't have any faculty of color. And so that, so when you think about the student experience as well, that's something that we're looking at. And when we started looking at the courses taught by diverse faculty, what we wanted to do is just really pay attention to it, if there aren't actual faculty members who are officially on those campuses, we want to think about ways to at least still make sure that the students on those campuses get exposed to diverse faculty. And so we, every quarter and academic year, we look at this data to try to make sure that we're exposing our students to diversity. So when we're looking at interventions to enhance the diversity on our college campuses, the diversity of faculty, one of the things we did is we started really encouraging diverse faculty to teach on those suburban campuses that don't have faculty of color. And in cases where they still had some difficulty getting faculty of color to work on those campuses, we started utilizing diverse adjuncts to teach some more courses. So again, we could expose our students to diverse faculty. We also started integrating diverse speakers and lecturers into the classroom. And we started, just as a way of really building a pipeline of diverse faculty, we started encouraging and kind of facilitating students' interaction with diverse faculty. We started encouraging students to engage in program-sponsored events to meet diverse faculty on multiple campuses. So if they're on a campus where they don't get as much exposure, encouraging them to come to these program-sponsored events so they can see that there's a presence of diversity in our faculty body, even if it isn't as pronounced on their campus. And we also started being mindful of how we mentor adjuncts and full-time faculty in order to enhance the recruitment and retention of diverse instructors in the program. So there wouldn't be like this revolving door. So when we look at faculty retention and diversity, equity, and inclusion, some of the feedback in the literature indicates that faculty of color are often presumed to be less competent and qualified than their white peers. Also, when they're considered for tenure, goodness of fit is often in question because people wonder, do they really fit in here? The diverse faculty often experience negative bias from students, which impacts their teaching evaluations. And programs can enhance their capacity to retain diverse faculty by acknowledging and addressing the historical and contextual issues that impact them. So again, just the key to really enhancing the experience of these diverse faculty members is not ignoring those dynamics, that those dynamics exist. And the institutional oppression that is experienced by counselor educators can be improved through the advocacy and accountability of CACREP, because at the end of the day, CACREP holds us accountable for having a diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. And within that plan, those interventions can be developed, and CACREP encourages us to do that, which then puts encourages the university as a whole to embrace some of those changes and adjustments to the program. Retaining faculty of color also involved not tokenizing the faculty by disproportionately burdening them with culturally related service projects and committees that require diverse representation, because that is often done at the expense of those faculty members being able to use their time to attend to the other areas of their professional development. And when we're thinking about tokenization, which is the high profile positions that have little to no decision-making authority, when that is done, it diminishes the credibility of the faculty who identify with specific communities. So just being mindful that that tokenizing the faculty does not help create an inclusive and supportive environment. So when we're thinking about the faculty and as a whole, and diverse faculty in particular, what we want to be mindful of is that institutional oppression that is experienced by counselor educators can be improved through mentorship practices. And researchers have indicated that retaining faculty of color involves providing them with research mentorship, helping them collaborate with senior faculty members on projects, and supporting their research agendas, especially when it's pertaining to multicultural issues. Faculty of color often find themselves having limited access to the social networks that could help them decipher and navigate the unwritten rules of obtaining tenure. So again, that's why this mentorship piece is so important in order to assist diverse faculty members with navigating that system and being retained at their institutions and having longevity in their careers. So when we looked at mentorship and the counseling program, what we were clear about is that mentorship could be used to enhance the career development of our diverse faculty and adjuncts. And we wanted to make sure that the areas of interest that could potentially be useful to those faculty members and adjuncts included some key areas. And again, it's up to the faculty and their mentors to kind of determine and figure out what makes sense for their areas of interest and their goals to be. But some of the areas of interest that we identified included helping the faculty develop resources and strategies for addressing multicultural issues in their career development. So just being mindful that many faculty members want their mentorship relationship to be able to navigate those challenges. Mentees also wanted support with utilizing culturally informed practices in their work with clients and counselors in training and supervisees. So again, just being mindful of how those skills can be developed. Integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion practices into various functions in higher education. Exploring the trends and issues and innovations in counseling, and exploring opportunities for advancement in higher education administration. So those are some of that's a snapshot of some of the areas that are included in the options that clients have, that mentees have for identifying some of their goals and areas that they want to work on with their mentors. The mentorship process is facilitated by the diversity, equity, and inclusion lead. So that person helps recruit mentors and reach out to mentees to determine their mentorship needs. And the DEI lead helps the mentor and mentee negotiate the alignment between their areas of interest. So we have mentors and mentees that are partnered together that feel like they can really learn and grow. And also, this process cultivated pathways for adjuncts and guest lecturers to potentially become future full-time faculty members. So adjuncts were especially included in this process with the understanding that they may have aspirations for entering higher education, and we did not want to leave them out of this process. And over the duration of the mentorship relationship, there is a formative assessment and a summative assessment that both of those are administered to the mentor and the mentee. The formative and summative assessment for the mentee is really a way to assess their progress on their areas of interest. And again, those areas of interest may include multicultural issues. And the formative and summative assessment of the mentors included an assessment of their cultural competence as they worked with their mentees. And the hope is that through the formative assessment process is that if there are any challenges or any gaps in what is needed that the mentee needs from the relationship that aren't being addressed, is that they have time to reconcile that and have a conversation about it so they can address it. So by the time the summative assessment of the process comes along, they're able to note that they got what they needed. And so with the mentors and looking at their cultural competence within the context of their role as mentor, we included questions such as the mentor explored how cultural identity impacted the mentorship process. So we've added that broaching component to the assessment piece. So they have to talk about it, even if it's determined to not be an issue. The broaching has happened. And then there's the examination of the dynamics of culture in the mentee's career growth and development. So asking the mentor to explicitly have a conversation with their mentee about cultural dynamics in their career growth and development. So again, that broaching has happened, and the broaching has happened in regards to the mentee's career development and culture, as well as cultural identity dynamics in the context of the mentor-mentee relationship. So overall, and in conclusion, this whole process of developing and implementing this diversity, equity, and inclusion plan has given our counseling program some insight into the needs and dynamics of various segments of our student body, as well as the faculty. And in response to the information we've gathered in this process of rolling out the DEI plan, we've been able to utilize some individual and group level interventions to enhance the program and the experiences of our faculty and staff and students. And this is a learning process, and it's, we're still working on evolving and refining this process as we reflect on the data that we have started to collect and our ways of kind of further developing that process. These are references, and I'll open it up to questions.